بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. وكذا لا يقبل خبره ولو أبهم بلفظ التعديل كأن يقول الراوي عنه أخبرني الثقة، لأنه قد يكون ثقة عنده مجروحا عند غيره، وهذا على الأصح في المسألة. ولهذه النكتة لم يقبل المرسل ولو أرسله العدل جازما به لهذا الاحتمال بعينه. وقيل يقبل تمسكا بالظاهر إذ الجرح على خلاف الأصل. وقيل إن كان القائل عالما أجزأه ذلك في حق من يوافقه في مذهبه، وهذا ليس من مباحث علوم الحديث والله تعالى الموفق. We concluded the last lesson saying that if a narrator's name is not taken, then his narration cannot be accepted. So the reason given is that if his identity is not known, then how can we know about his reliability and about his incredibility? However, what happens if the narrator does not take the name, but he convinces us that the person who narrated to him was trustworthy and honest? So Ibn Hajar rahmallah discusses the ruling of this in this paragraph. He starts off this paragraph by mentioning his preferred view, but then he also alludes to two other views. So he says, وَكَذَا لَا يُقْبَلُ خَبَرُهُ وَلَوْ أُبْهِمَ بِلَفْظِ التَّعْدِيلِ. That just as we will not accept the narration of someone who is, if a mubham or vague word is used, for example, it is said fulan or sheikh or rajul, in the same way, if words of ta'dil are used, then too we will not accept. كأي يقول الراوي عنه أخبرني الثقة. So like he uses the word أخبرني الثقة, even if he uses these types of words, then too the narration will not be accepted. Like he uses words and he says حدثني من أثق به or حدثني من لا أتهمه. So words like this here, then too we will not be able to accept the narration. So the same ruling will apply even though if the name is left vague and a title to prove credibility was used. And the fact that the narrator is claiming that he heard from reliable sources, that makes no difference. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions the ruling and he says لأنه قد يكون ثقة عنده مجروحا عند غيره. That probably this person, this scholar or this narrator might regard the person who narrated to him as reliable, but others might regard him to be weak. So this is the same reason which Ibn Hajar rahmallah gave under the chapter of Mu'allaq. You remember earlier in the kitab he said, وَإِنَّمَا ذُكِرَ التَّعْلِيقُ فِي قِسْمِ الْمَرْدُودِ لِلْجَهْلِ بِحَالِ الْمَحْذُوفِ. That we don't know the status of the person whose name is being left out, and therefore we cannot accept Mu'allaq narrations. So even if there's tawthiq, then too. So whilst this narrator might regard his teacher or the narrator above him to be reliable, others might hold a different view. This means we cannot blindly follow a verdict. Rather, we need to study the rulings of different scholars and scrutinize the reasons on how they issued their verdicts. And the reason for this here is that بل إضراب المحدث عن تسميته ريبة تقع ترددا في القلب. That when a narrator omits the name of the person who narrated to him, but he justifies it by claiming that the person who narrated to him was reliable, then it does create a doubt that if he was reliable, then why did he not just take the name? That do you fear if you're going to be taking his name, then others would defer to you? What's the reason that you are not taking his name and you're just mentioning that someone reliable told you? So on this here, Alama Qasim rahmallah remarked, he says, يلزم من هذا تقديم الجرح المتوهم على التعديل الثابت. That this inadvertently leads us to prefer assumed jarh over concrete integrity. Why? Because every person has a clean slate. That everyone is born on fitrah and everyone has a clean slate. You need to prove that the person is wrong and the person is a sinner or the person has a weak memory. Then only we will be able to criticize that person. Otherwise, that person, his integrity remains concrete. So here you're only assuming that there is jarh that probably others have criticized him. So you and plus you have this person who's clearly telling you that the person was reliable. So now it becomes even more concrete, the integrity of this narrator. So you are giving preference to assume jarah, that probably others would regard him as weak, over concrete integrity, that he's clearly, very clearly saying that حدثني ثقة وهو خلاف النظر. So he's saying doesn't make sense. وقد تقدم على أنه لو عرف فيه جرح كان مختلفا فيه. He's saying even if they had to be jarah, then too there would be difference of opinion. So even if here you're assuming that others would regard him as weak, but even ala sabili tanazul, if you say yes, others do regard him as weak, then too it's still not walaysa bimardud, it's still not rejected, it's only mukhtalaf fih. So Mullah al-Qari rahmallah responded to saying that al-ikhtilafu far'u ma'rifatihi, that yes, it becomes mukhtalaf fihi if the person is known. Only once a person is known, and then you have some who are saying that he is reliable and others who are saying that no, he is not reliable, then there is difference of opinion. But in this instance he is not known. والكلام هنا إنما هو في المجهول والحكم على المجهول بكونه عدلا أيضا مجهول ولهذا خبره غير مقبول فتأمل فإن كلامه مدخول. So he's saying that understand this properly and don't mix it up with others. That's a completely different scenario where the name of a narrator is explicitly mentioned and some are regarding him as reliable and others differ. Yeah, the person is not known. So Alama Al-Qani rahmallah, he mentioned the following in response to Alama Qasim. He said, ولا يخفاك أنه ليس تعديل ثابت لإبهام المعدل. He's saying that there is no تعديل ثابت. Although the narrator is saying حدثني الثقة or حدثني من أثق به, then too this تعديل is not ثابت, it's not established. Why? Because we don't know who the person who is being mu'addal, the person who is being said with regards to whether he is really we don't know his identity. فَتَعْدِيلُهُ كَلَا تَعْدِيل. So making ta'dil of him is just as good as not making any ta'dil at all. وَلَيْسَ هَذَا مِنْ تَقْدِيمِ الْجَرْحِ فِي شَيْءٍ. He said that this here has nothing to do with giving preference to jarh over anything. بل الرد هنا لعدم ثبوت العدالة لا لثبوت الجرح. The reason why we are rejecting this narration is because it has not been established that the person is adil. It's not because we're just assuming that he could be weak. So then he says, فَلَا تَكُنْ مِنَ الْمُرْتَابِينَ فِي حَقِّ الْيَقِينِ. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah admits that this here is his preferred view and there are other views. So he says, وَهَذَا عَلَى الْأَصَحِّ فِي الْمَسْأَلَةِ. That Ibn Hajar rahmallah prefers this view. And there were many other leading scholars before him who also held this view. Allama Munawi rahmallah says, وبه قطع الخطيب والصيرفي وارتضاه ابن الجزري, that Allama Khatib, Allama Sayrafi rahmallah, Ibn al-Jazari rahmallah, they all preferred this view. In fact, there were lots of other Shafi'is who also accept this view, and many, almost the majority of Muhaddithin. So Allama Zarkashi rahmallah, he mentions the name of a few in Al-Bahr al-Muhit. He says, كما جزم به أبو بكر الكفال الشاشي والخطيب البغدادي والصيرفي والقاضي أبو الطيب والشيخ أبو إسحاق وابن الصباغ والماوردي والروياني. So you can see many scholars held this view. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah is following previous scholars and is not independently choosing a view here. He now presents another reason to strengthen his point, and he says, وَلِهَذِهِ النُّكْتَةِ لَمْ يُقْبَلِ الْمُرْسَلِ. That it is for this very reason that mursal is not accepted. That maybe the tabi'i, he's making irsal, and maybe he's omitting the name of another tabi'i. And you remember we done that whole discussion right up until 8 tabi'in, he could be leaving out their names. So maybe he regards the person whose name he's leaving out, he regards that person as reliable, but others will hold a different opinion. So he says, وَلَوْ أَرْسَلَهُ الْعَدْلُ جَازِمًا بِهِ. Even if a very reliable person has to make irsal, and he is absolutely convinced, لهذا الاحتمال بعينه, because of this very reason. So, amongst other reasons, like, those who accept the mursal narration, they mentioned that one of the reasons is that mursal should be accepted because the tabi'i would only omit the name of the one who narrated to him, and he would only attribute it to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam if he was absolutely convinced that the person who told him was reliable. And we have mentioned that reason under the chapter of mursal. But Shafi'is, they don't buy into this reason. Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions that it's precisely for this reason that Shafi'is do not accept that argument. That probably the tabi'i could personally regard the one who he is narrating from as reliable, but others could view him differently. So that very same reason also applies here. Ibn Hajar rahmallah, now after mentioning his preferred view that it should not be accepted, he mentions two other views and he says waqila. So both views he mentions with sigha tamrid to indicate and to show us how weak that he feels these views are. So he says waqil yuqbalu, that it should be accepted. If you have a narrator saying that a reliable person told me, then we should accept it. Why tamassukan bil zahir? Because this is apparent that a person is innocent until proven guilty. So it's not natural for a person to be weak. It's natural for a person to be reliable. It's not natural for a person to be a liar. The innate quality of every human being is that he will be truthful by nature. Thereafter, he learns how to lie, and then that becomes his habit. But his very nature is that he will be regarded as a reliable person. So this view is that we should accept it, because now at least we have one person who is also then approving him, and that strengthens what is apparent and what is the natural condition. And also here that we are being told that a person is reliable, so we don't know of any reason to discredit him, and therefore we should accept his report. So amongst those who held this view, Majd ibn Taymiyyah in Al-Musawwada, he says, Mas'ala, Al-Musawwada is written by the few scholars. So his view there, Mas'ala, إذا قال العدل حدثني الثقة أو من لا أتهمه أو رجل عدل ونحو ذلك فإنه يقبل. So you can see, he's saying that when a adil person, so he's not even saying an imam or anything, just any honest person is saying, any random honest person is saying, حدثني ثقة أو حدثني من لا أتهمه أو رجل عدل, then فإنه يقبل. He's saying definitely we should be able to accept it. وإن رددنا المرسل والمجهول. He's saying even though we don't accept mursal narrations and if the person is unknown. Why? لأن ذلك تعديل صريح عندنا, because here there is clear تعديل. He's saying that the person who narrated to me is ثقة. Likewise, Amir al-San'ani, he said, ووضع اسم الثقة موضع اسمه فكأنه قال, that he to put the name ثقة in place of the name of the narrator. So فكأنه قال, so instead of saying حدثني and taking the name of the person, حدثني عبد الله, حدثني محمد, حدثني يونس, he just say حدثني ثقة. So he's saying وهذا تعديل إجمالي. This is تعديل إجمالي. So فأما الإجمالي في التعديل فالصحيح, so you can see he's making تصحيح في الأصول وعلوم الحديث أنه يكفي. Why? لتعثر ذكر أسباب العدالة. So now he's quoting the hadith there. You can't tell you that he's narrating the whole sanad, 4 or 5 people in the chain, or maybe even 3 people in the chain. Now he has to tell you that حدثني ثقة, and then he is ثقة because of this the reason. He's saying that it will be too difficult to do that. So he says that because of this year, which the ta'dil al-ijmali should be accepted. So these are scholars who hold this view. And you can picture it also in our times, if there is a very, very senior person that you hold in high esteem. So maybe not even a scholar, just a person who you hold in high esteem, and he has to tell you that someone trustworthy told him something, then you wouldn't doubt that quote. So likewise, now imagine if the person is also a scholar, and say maybe he's like your Ustad of Bukhari, or very, very senior Sheikh al-Ḥadīth, like, and he is telling you, then all the more reason you won't have any doubt. So now you can imagine in Khairul Qurun, or in that earlier times, when a adil person is telling you that, and that adil person has the fikr, he has the worry that nothing falsely must be attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He knows the consequences of quoting from someone who is not reliable. and yet he is clearly telling you, if he is lying in his claim, then he himself loses his reputation. So he should be able to accept it. So that's the second view. And then the third view is وَقِيلْ إِنْ كَانَ الْقَائِلُ عَالِمًا أَجَزَأَهُ. So in some manuscripts, like in our copy, Sheikh Nuruddin Aitra put the ha there. And in some, that ha is not there. So you just come أَجَزَأَ. Or in that case, if that ha is not there, then you can read it as أُجْزِيَ. But here in ours, the ha is there. أَجَزَأَهُ ذَلِكَ فِي حَقِّ مَنْ يُوَافِقَهُ فِي مَذْهَبِهِ. So the third view is that if an expert and an authority is mentioning that a reliable person narrated, then we can accept the narration. And if you remember Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he got this here from Alama ibn Salah rahimahullah. Alama ibn Salah said, فَإِنْ كَانَ الْقَائِلُ لِذَلِكَ عَالِمًا أُجْزِيَ ذَلِكَ فِي حَقِّ مَنْ يُوَافِقُهُ فِي مَذْهَبِهِ عَلَى مَا اخْتَارَهُ بَعْضُ الْمُحَقِّقِينَ. So there are scholars within the Shafi'i madhab who follow this view. Alama Munawi rahimahullah, he mentions the name of Imam al-Haramain. Likewise, Alama Rafi'i rahimahullah, and he also quotes it from Alama Subki rahimahullah. He takes the name of Imam al-Haramain, but actually the various statements of Imam al-Haramain al-Majuwaini rahimahullah, they all have to be studied and they will have to be understood correctly before a view could be attributed to him. Because he first said, والتعديل على الإبهام مع تركه تسمية المعدل لا يتضمن الثقة في حق غير المعدل. So this is what he first said in Al-Burhan في أصول الفقه. He's saying that التعديل على الإبهام, without taking the name of the person, لا يتضمن الثقة. He's saying that it doesn't give any benefit to the person whose name is omitted, and he will not be regarded as ثقة. So this is on page 409. But then on the next page, he says, فإذا قال الراوي سمعت رجلا يقول قال فلان فليس في هذا المسلك من الرواية ما يقتضي الثقة فالوجع القطع بردها وإن قال سمعت رجلا موثوقا به عدلا رضا يقول. So if he's saying like this here, using these words to accredit the person, then he says وكان الراوي من يقبل تعديله لعدالته واستقامة حاله وعلمه بالجرح والتعديل ودرايته فهذا يورث الثقة لا محالة. So now he's saying that as long as the person is a scholar, he knows the laws of jarh and ta'dil, then if he has to say it, then it's fine. So this contradicts what you just mentioned one page earlier. But then in another book of his, in Al-Mankhul, he stipulated that this here is only for a muhaddis, not even for a faqih. So he says, وَالْمُخْتَارِ عِنْدِي أن الإمام العدل إذا قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أو أخبرني الثقة قبله فأما الفقهاء والمتوسعون, then he's saying that if they have to say that لا أن تثبت فلا يقبل. So I'm not a Shafi'i and I didn't get a chance to read all the books of Imam al-Haramain, so I don't know if there are other statements as well. But all I know is that Allama Sakhawi rahimahullah, if you remember we discussed it in lesson 184 of Muqaddimah ibn Salah, he said وَلَعَلَّهُ Imam al-Haramain. He used the word la'alla to say that probably, it's possibly Imam al-Haramain. He didn't say it with absolute conviction that it is Imam al-Haramain. So, but basically there are these groups of scholars who held this view that if a competent person, so not just any random, so like in contrast to what Majd ibn Taymiyyah said, he just said that if a adl have to say, but here it means like if a scholar who knows the laws of jarh and ta'dil. In fact, taking it a step further, Allama Qasim rahmallah, he gave the example and he said, مثل قول الشافعي أخبرني الثقين القول المبتكر. On page 93, he says that an example is where Imam Shafi'i rahmallah is to say أخبرني الثقة. So based on that, Mullah al-Qari rahmallah mentioned that the alim here actually refers to a mujtahid. So he says a mujtahidan كمالك والشافعي ونحوهما مما يميز بينه وبين غيره. So he's saying that it actually refers to a mujtahid, and thereafter he quotes Allama Qasim to prove that it's because of Allama Qasim's statement that he is mentioning that it is a mujtahid. So if it is a mujtahid, then this here which also follows كَمَنْ يُوَافِقُهُ فِي مَذْهَبِهِ. You can see that madhab will be like in the istilahi meaning of the normal madhab, as you know, a madhab, the madhab of one of the immatul mujtahidin. So if it is a mujtahid, then definitely those who follow his madhab can accept, because they would follow the mujtahid even if they don't know any proof. So like we don't even know the reasoning and the proof of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmallah, yet we follow him. So if you have the Imam presenting a proof, then all the more reason that he should be followed. كفى هذا التعديل في حق مقلديه في مذهبه, Hazrat Mullah Ali Qari rahmallah says. So therefore you can see in the footnote, Sheikh Nuruddin Itra says, وهذا هو المعتمد في حق من يقلد أحد الأئمة المتبوعين أنه يعتمد على تصحيحهم وتضعيفهم لأنهم مجتهدون في هذا العلم أيضا. So he's saying that even in this knowledge of علوم الحديث, our mujtahidun or masters, and therefore if they make tasheeh or tad'if, this is a very important point, then we should have to follow them. So we don't only follow them on the mas'ala, on what's derived from the narration, even on the status of the narration. So whether you can get all the Shafi'is telling you that this here is weak, whether you can get some random scholars telling you that it's mawdu', whether you can get some Salafis today coming and telling you that it's absolutely basis. If your Imam and the Mujtahidun in your madhab told you that it's sahih, then what Shaykh Nuruddin Atr is saying, that you have to follow them. So he says, فَعْلَمْ ذَلِكَ وَعْرِفْ أَدِلَّةِ مَذْهَبِكَ عَلَى الْإِخْتِصَارِ. Learn the basic adillah of your madhab. Twice, لِتَكُونَ مُتَّبِعًا لِلنَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم مُبَاشَرَةً, so that you can be following the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم and you can rest assured. And it's nice to know that dalil. And in our case, especially when doing takhassus fil hadith, to learn the adillah, is that when people know that you specialized in hadith, then they tend to ask you many proofs. And in that case, then obviously you have to base it on the condition of the person. So if you know it's someone who you meet generally, if it's some distant family member also, or maybe someone in your neighborhood, someone who you know is not just asking you for debates, then you explain to him, or you can explain to them all the adillah. And if it's some random person online, then obviously you don't have to show them that you know the dalail, because even if you quote to them the dalail, they're not going to accept you. They're still going to follow who they regard as scholars. But there are a lot of sincere people, and many times because of the internet, people would hear about something, and therefore they would ask you. So you just basically tell them. In fact, they don't even understand the dalail, but once you explain to them, and now they know that we have some basis, they would be able to accept. So you can see that actually the mujtahidun would do this here, and they would do it. When you read the Muwatta, you find Imam Malik rahmallah making ta'adil alal Ibhām. But more than Imam Malik rahmallah, Imam Shafi'i rahmallah would do this, and he would do it really, really frequently. Very often he would say, akhbarani thiqah. And he would also say, akhbarani man la attahimuhu. So lots of times Imam Shafi'i rahmallah would do this. In fact, there's a whole treatise written in which an attempt is done to just clarify all those reliable people who Imam Shafi'i rahmallah did not mention by name. And in our lessons of Muqaddamah ibn Salah, if I remember, I think it was lesson 184, we did mention all the different possibilities as to who the possible narrators could be. We quoted from Alama, from Fathul Mughith, etc. So you can refer to lesson 184 for all the different possibilities, because as we explained, it's based on the narrator above. In fact, just in passing, to tell you the reason why Imam Shafi'i rahmallah would do this. So Imam Bayhaqi rahmallah, he mentions that in his Manaqib al-Shafi'i, he says, وحين صنف الشافعي الكتب الجديدة بمصر لم يكن معه أكثر كتبه. That Imam Shafi'i rahmallah, when he was now writing his books on his new views in Egypt, then he didn't have many of his books at his disposal. كذلك حين صنف الكثير حين صنف he's saying like the same was also when he wrote many of his الكتب القديمة in Iraq. لم يكن معه أكثر كتبه. So فربما كان يشك في من حدثه ولا يشك في ثقته. So many times he would doubt that probably did this start of mine tell it to me, or did this start of mine tell it to me? So he knew, he was absolutely convinced that the person who told it to him is thiqa, but he did not know, and he was unable. So if you take your Dora teachers, the teachers in Dora al-Hadith, so the Ustad maybe who taught you Sahih al-Bukhari, and the Ustad who taught you Sahih Muslim, and the Ustad who taught you Sunan Abi Dawud. So all of them are thiqa. But now you don't know in whose dars who mentioned what. So irrespective of, you can just say that a reliable person told me, whether it was the Ustad of Tirmidhi or whether it was the Ustad of Bukhari, irrespective of who it is, it will be a thiqah. So therefore, Imam Shafi'i rahmallah would say, akhbarani thiqah. That's what Imam Baqi rahmallah mentions in Manaqib al-Shafi'i. So when a mujtahid is sure that a person is reliable, then no one can argue that probably others, if they to know the reasons, then they would discredit this person. In fact, even if we do find others discrediting him, then we will give preference to what the mujtahid said, because obviously we trust the knowledge and the integrity and piety of the mujtahid much more than we trust others. But now this whole issue of a muqallid following a mujtahid, it has nothing to do with the science of a hadith, and therefore Ibn Hajar rahmallah says, وَهَذَا لَيْسَ مِن مَبَاحِثِ عُلُومِ الْحَدِيثِ وَاللَّهُ تَعَالَى الْمُوَفَّقِ. That this here has nothing to do with the science of ulum al-hadith, and rather, as Imam Munawi rahmallah says, بَل مِن مَبَاحِثِ عِلْمِ أُصُولِ الْفِقْهِ. That this here has to do with usul al-fiqh. Because as you know, usul al-hadith is with regards to inspecting the chain and scrutinizing the narrator. It has nothing to do with following a mujtahid. So that is why Ibn Hajar rahmallah is just omitting going into more detail with regards to this. But then why did he even mention it in the first place? If it has nothing to do with the ulum al-hadith, then why even mention it here? So Mullah al-Qari says, وَإِنَّمَا ذَكَرَهُ اسْتِضْرَارًا وَمُوَافَقَةً لِلْمَقَامِ اسْتِشْهَادًا. But he's actually indicating towards an exclusion. So from his original verdict is that وَكَذَا لَا يُقْبَلُ خَبْرُهُ وَلَوْ أُبْهِمَ بِلَفْظِ التَّعْدِيلِ. That is the general ruling. But there is one exclusion. Now, why is he not emphatically mentioning the exclusion? The exclusion is the mujtahid. That if anyone else have to do it, it's not accepted. But a mujtahid is excluded from here. So if the mujtahid makes ta'dil ala al-Ibhām, then it will be accepted. But if anyone else leave the name of a narrator obscure, but then just accredits him, then the narration will be rejected. So he's making this exclusion, but he's not mentioning the exclusion very clearly. So the exclusion here of a mujtahid does not have to be emphatically mentioned, because you will find the details about this in the books of usul al-fiqh. So in this way, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah and the Shafi'is before him, even though they mention their view in general in the books of usul al-hadith, but for the exclusion you have to go to the books of usul al-fiqh, and that is how they can still adhere to their view, and they can also follow their imam. Because when Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah is saying akhbarani thiqa, like we're saying that so many places he done it, Ibn Hajar can still follow him in spite of mentioning وَكَذَا لَا يُقْبَلُ خَبْرُ وَلَوْ أُبْهِمَ بِلَفْظِ التَّعْدِيلِ, because the details of that are all in the books of usul al-fiqh. But now, like we quoted from Allama Qadi rahmallah and others, there were those, they did not refer to the mujtahid, rather they would just regard it as an expert in jarh wa ta'dil. So you have these different views. You can say those who specify it to a mujtahid, which is now confining it a bit, or you can expand it further and say, no, not only a mujtahid, anyone who has an imam in usul al-jarh wa ta'dil. Now, after discussing those views, to come to the Hanafi view, we find that Allama ibn al-Hanbali rahmallah in Qafw al-Athari says, وَالَّذِي يَنْبَغِي أَن يَكُونَ مَذْهَبُنَا قُبُولُهُ وَإِنَّهُ أُبْهِمَ بِغَيْرِ لَفْظِ التَّعْدِيلِ. He's saying that in our madhab that we should accept it, even leave alone saying the words of ta'dil, even if the words of ta'dil are not mentioned, then too we could accept it. But then what he says thereafter is very important. وَلَكِنْ بِمَثْلِ الشَّرْطِ الَّذِي اعْتَبَرْنَاهُ فِي الْمُرْسَلِ. But it has to fulfill the conditions which you mentioned in mursal. And the conditions of mursal is that the person doing it has to be reliable himself, and it has to be in khairul qurun. So this is how he mentioned it in Qafw al-Athar, and then in Al-Far'u al-Athith he elaborated more. He says, فَيُقْبَلُ إِنْ كَانَ مَنْ أَبْهَمَهُ مِنَ الْقَرْنِ الثَّانِي أَوِ الثَّالِثِ. You can see in خَيْرُ الْقُرُونِ وَإِنْ لَمْ يُعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا يَرْوِي إِلَّا عَنِ الثِّقَةِ. So now some will have that, you remember in Muqaddimah ibn Salawi done, that some they specified it with only that imam who his practice is that he only narrates from a thiqa person. But he's saying that we are not confining it. Even if it's just a general person, even if it is a person who narrates from others who are weak as well. وكذا إن كان ممن دونهما عند بعض أصحابنا مطلقا وعند الآخرين بشرط أن يروي الثقة حديثه الذي أبهم في سنده شيخه. So he's saying that now looking after خير القرون, then some will still say yes, still we can just accept it. But after خير القرون, there will be those who will specify it. So this here is all because we accept mursal narrations, all the more reason we will accept here, because in mursal we are assuming that there is tawfiq, and here there is very clear tawfiq. So Ibn al-Hammam rahmallah, he said, بل كونه في حكم المرسل أولى لتصريحه بالثقة، وقوله حدثني الفقيه تعديل فوق الإرسال عنده من يقبله. And likewise in الفرع الأثيث, ابن الحمل quotes from علم كمال الشمني, وهو ماشٍ على قول من يحتج بالمرسل وأولى بالقبول، وإنما جعله أولى به لأنها هنا تصريحا بالتعديل ونوع التسميع، وأما في الإرسال فلا شيء منهما. So therefore, according to Hanafis, it is the ta'dil al-Ibhām could be accepted, but there are two conditions. The first is that the person doing it should be an expert, and the second is that it must be done in khairul qurun. And on the side, you can see that how important it is to always refer back to the books of the madhab, because like when Allama Zarkashi rahmallah, when he's attributing it to Hanafis, he just says وَقَالَ أَبُو حَنِيفَ يُقْبَلْ. He just said according to Hanafis we accept it. But we don't just accept it, we put conditions that it must be in khairul qurun and it must be in expert. So this is what Mullah Zafar Ahmad Tanwi rahmallah also mentioned, إذا كان الراوي القائل حدثني الثقة ثقة فالذي ينبغي يكون مذهبنا قبول مثل هذا التعديل في حق من هو من القرون الثلاثة. So this here is in قرون الثلاثة. Why? لأن المجهول منها حجة عندنا، فالمجهول بصيغة التعديل أولى بالقبول، وأما في غيرها فلا. So according to Hanafis, this is the ruling, and this is where we differ with what Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned here. Inshallah, we'll continue from here on Saturday. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa